going viral. Check out Patrick Mahomes throwing a pass to a fan off the parade bus. It's the off-season, and Mahomes still throwing dimes, Nick.
When I said watch out, there's another video of him throwing a pass, and a dude runs head first into a parking meter and appears to just be... it's bad. Mahomes tried to check on him afterwards, at least via Twitter. But this was another dime. Added to the stats.
Running into a pole is a lawsuit for Patrick Mahomes. Yeah, you got to throw it. Listen, throw away from the defense. Throw away from the coverage.
That's on him.
Throw your man open, right, Coach? You got to always throw your man open.
And you better get that blanket insurance policy.
That's right.
Now that things have changed.
He's not accountable for people not having good spatial awareness.
An Eagles fan would have climbed that pole.
An Eagles fan would run into the pole without anyone throwing the ball to him.
I've
seen that.
Patriots fan would have cut the pole down.
Brady would have thrown him open.
Patriots fan would have cut the pole down. Exactly. Had a little under-the-table deal with the Public Works Department.
Oh, wow. That's not what he said, but that is also funny. Guys, that was good. This was a good one.
I'm just telling you.
Stories to start your morning, sponsored by Ram Trucks, built to serve. So the Chiefs did celebrate the first Super Bowl parade in 50 years yesterday. Andy Reid told the crowd, we are coming back here next year.
Oh, you got an issue with that? When I say it, Coach, it's a problem. When your guy Andy Reid says it, what say you, Coach Mangini?
I'd say I hope it works out for you.
Okay. What about
that it's easier to say than to do. I'd say that a few beers into the I've said things that I would have maybe liked to have back.
Can I get into for instance?
I think that they have a chance. They have an opportunity to win every year with Andy and with Patrick and the things that they've accomplished. But they're entering into a whole new world, and there's a learning curve that goes along with it. And not very many teams have mastered that learning curve.
All right, on to the losing side of that. Jimmy Garoppolo said the struggles in Super Bowl 54 will fuel him to come back even better. Brian Westbrook, how should the Niners feel about Jimmy G moving forward?
You know, Jimmy G played 3.5 good quarters. I mean, he missed some bad throws towards the end of that football game. But again, they're in the Super Bowl. There were 30 other teams that were not in this game that certainly have a lot of things to work on. I think Jimmy G has to be better. He has to be more consistent. But again, he's only started 26 games in the NFL. I think Kyle Shanahan and Jimmy G together can figure this thing out.
And for a long time in this game, he had only missed 3 passes. I think he was 18 for 21.
Yep.
He was having a pretty impressive day overall. And there were a bunch of throws that Patrick Mahomes would have liked to have back in that game as well. So the idea that someone can't continue to grow and get better, I don't agree with him. I think he'll get better.
Listen, I think he can grow and get better. I do think the 26 games is a little misleading because he is already 28 years old. He has been in the league quite some time.
You got to play to get the experience.
On to the Browns now. So they introduced their new general manager, Andrew Berry, yesterday. Berry said their goal is to aggressively make Cleveland a winner and that he's excited about Baker Mayfield's future. Nick, you expect the Browns to bounce back next year?
I do. They do not have the benefit that the Chiefs have, that the Patriots have had for a long time, which is you wonder if there's another contender in their division. You know Baltimore's a contender, and if Big Ben can be anywhere close to what he was pre-elbow injury, with that defense, they will be a contender as well. So I think they're in one of the tougher divisions in football, but I do believe Baker's going to cut down on the turnovers, and they're instantly going to be better at head coach. If they had hired a tandem of Jenna and our statistician Dusty at head coach, I would have liked their chances.
Quick follow-up. You more or less optimistic coming into this year than you were last year?
Oh, you have to be. I'm a little less optimistic than I was last year. Last year, I thought Baker could be league MVP.
Well, you got to be more comfortable with Stefanski than Freddie Kitchens, though, as head coach.
Agreed, but I'm less. I thought Baker was one of the young superstars in the league. Yeah. He has to go out and reprove that.
I like that they have young, smart guys that are going to work together and create a vision and hopefully support it with values in the way they do things.
I think Andrew Berry is going to be great for them.
All right, moving on to the Eagles now. Their disappointing season was cut short with their wild card loss to the Seahawks, but their 27-year-old franchise quarterback Carson Wentz isn't wallowing in defeat, instead deciding to look to the future. Tweeting during Super Bowl Sunday, sights set on today being a workday for me next year. All right, Brian, you buying that Carson Wentz and the Eagles can make a Super Bowl run next season?
I think it's going to be tough. I think they have some holes to fill, but they have the components of Super Bowl teams. They have a good quarterback. They're going to have to fill some holes in the wide receiver position, but I think offensively they started moving in the right direction. Last year, the last quarter of the season, Carson Wentz became a much better leader of that football team. He became a much better leader of men. When you take Alshon out of the picture, you take Nelson Aguilar out of the picture, he allowed those young guys and took those young guys that basically had no NFL experience to a playoff berth, was able to win the last 4 games of the season. The other thing they have to do offensively, they have to be much more creative. They just can't dink and dunk their way, throw the ball to the tight ends and try to find a way to win that way. They need some explosive plays down the field, and in order to get those explosive plays, they need downfield speed. They have to have some speed. Both of the teams that played in the Super Bowl and many of the teams that played in the playoffs have downfield speed. Right now, the Eagles don't have any speed downfield.
And I think the reality is when you're not in the Super Bowl, every day should be a work day for you. So go out and lift some weights or throw some balls or do whatever you need to do. But,
I love you so much.
But that being said, there's this element of, again, we fired the offensive coordinator, right? It's got to be the coach's fault. It can't be anybody else's fault. So we get rid of him, even though there's an offensive head coach, and I'm sure he had a lot of input in it. So now we have a new system in play. Well, maybe it's not a new system, but there's going to be a new structure in place that he's going to have to get used to. And it's going to be interesting to see how much he continues to mature and grow, and whether or not during the course of this offseason and even into the start of the season, what the vibe is coming out of that locker room. Are they a unified group? Do they all support each other? And you saw that in Kansas City, and you saw that in San Francisco, where they were behind whatever you want to say about Jimmy Garoppolo, the guys were behind him, and they supported him. And as much as your play is important, people believing in you is important as well.
But you still need the downfield speed. Yeah. Eagles were one of the slowest teams last year, and the 2 teams that made it to the Super Bowl were one of the fastest teams. You still need, I would imagine, your quarterback to play like he did that Super Bowl year when it was cut short for him with injury. Isn't that what those 2 things are what you need going into the season? Well, right now they don't have that speed, and they don't have any.
And I think to a degree they go hand in hand. Like I think to Brian's point, Wentz will play better if he has more dynamic playmakers on the outside. I also think in Wentz's defense, granted the competition wasn't the greatest, when their backs were up against the wall the final 5 weeks of the season, he played his best football. It was 300 yards per game passing, a passer rating of nearly 100, 10-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio as they went on that run at the end of the year. And the one game they lost in that run, I think it was to Miami, if I remember correctly, but they scored 32 points in that game. They didn't lose it because the offense didn't do enough. I do think this, though. Philly is not the team that won the Super Bowl. Coach talks about this all the time, but with Philadelphia, it is particularly true. That team had a dominant pass rush and a dominant offensive line. They had neither last year. To be totally candid, like, I don't know that team is going to come back again. And they did just pay the quarterback, and so the ability to have all the pieces
his salary cap number is actually fairly, I think it's only $18 million. So even though that number seemed big, and when we talk about it's big, $18 million versus
18 next year,
30
absolutely.
and 35 and 40 that we're talking about is actually small.
And by the way, if next year it's 18, that does mean a year or 2 down the road that bill will eventually come due. But they didn't overpay him. I think Wentz is right. If the going rate for league average is 28, then Wentz at 32 sounds about right. But I also think, and you alluded to it, Coach, I also think this is a year where we can really find out. All right, so let's see what exactly Doug Peterson is made of. He has last year he tried to go to every motivational ploy he had, and none of them really seemed to resonate with the team until the team was in win or go home situations where they were playing bad competition. The Giants twice, Washington, and then the big game of the year, the game of the year for them against Dallas, where they played well. And the question is, like, how good is Philly really? Are we going to look back on that Super Bowl and say, what a weird champion? Like that, beat the Patriots, go on this run, have a backup quarterback? Or are we going to look at that Super Bowl and say, okay, the weird year was last year as opposed to the championship year?
Don't forget how riddled they were with injuries last year. We came into last year saying how much depth they had. It didn't even matter. More than almost any team in the league, they were hurt top to bottom. Even Carson Wentz in that last game against Seattle went out with the concussion. But I mean, they were just really, really banged up. I think Doug Peterson had to do anything he could to motivate those guys.
Well, you also got to remember, going into the season, they were the top 3, one of the top 3 oldest teams in the league. And all of those players, Jason Peters, Darren Sproles, missed significant time, weren't able to contribute as much. And Jason Peters came back and helped. But again, he's 37, 38 years old. It's just hard to compete on that level. They have to get much younger. They need that explosion downfield. But defensively, like you mentioned, Nick, they have to find a way to get much better and be able to get to the quarterback. The teams that win in this league have the ability to be explosive downfield offensively and to be able to get to the quarterback defensively.
And they haven't had corners, and both their corners they do have, Mills and Darby, are free agents. So, like, even the Super Bowl year, the secondary wasn't great aside from Malcolm Jenkins. If the pass rush is lessened, you're in a really rough spot if you don't trust your back end.
Yeah, but to me, if you're tweeting out about what you're going to do next year, then it's your responsibility to make sure that you fixed all the things that you can control.
That's right.
All right, sounds good. Take a break. Coming up, sticking with
Should have
Philly.
done an Instagram video where he just puzzles look.